Hello and welcome to the Short Story Workshop. In each episode we read a short story and then discuss it. I'm here with Matt and Simone, and this week's story is The Frog in the Puddle by Edna Ferber. I picked this story. I liked it because it's more understated and quiet than a lot of the stories that we've read, but I still really enjoyed it and thought there was a bit of beauty about picking that quiet moment at night when everything seems terrible to set a story. So here it is, The Frog and the Puddle. The Frog and the Puddle by Edna Ferber.
Paddle.
Did I say it wrong?
You said the frog in the paddle.
The Frog and the Puddle.
Anyone who has ever written for the magazines, nobody could devise a more sweeping opening. It includes the Iceman who does a humorous article on the subject of his troubles, and the neglected wife next door who journalises, knows that a story the scene of which is not New York is merely junk. Take Fifth Avenue as a framework, pad it out to 5,000 words, and there you have the ideal short story. Consequently, I feel a certain timidity in confessing that I do not know Fifth Avenue from Hester Street when I see it, because I've never seen it. It has been said that from the latter to the former is a 10-year journey, from which I have gathered that they lie some miles apart. As for 42nd Street, of which musical comedians carol, I know not if it be a fashionable shopping thoroughfare or a factory district. A confession of this kind is not only good for the soul, but for the editor. It saves him the trouble of turning to page 2. This is the story of Chicago, which is a first cousin of New York, although the two are not on chummy terms. It is the story of that part of Chicago which lies east of Dearborn Avenue and south of Division Street, and which may be called the Nottingham Curtain District. In the Nottingham Curtain District, every front parlour window is embellished with a "Rooms with or without board" sign. The curtains themselves have mellowed from their original department store basement white to a rich, deep tone of Chicago smoke, which has the notorious London variety beaten by several shades. Block after block, the 2-storey and basement houses stretch, all grimy and gritty, looking sadly down upon the 5 square feet of mangy grass forming the pitiable front yard of each. Now and then the monotonous line of front stoops is broken by an outjutting basement delicatessen shop, but not often. The Nottingham Curtain District is not run heavily to delicacies. It is stronger on creamed cabbage and bread pudding. Up in the 3rd floor, back at Miss Buck's, elegant rooms $2.50 and up a week, gents preferred, Gertie was brushing her hair for the night. 100 strokes with a bristled brush. Anyone who reads the beauty column in the newspapers knows that. There was something heroic in the sight of Gertie brushing her hair 100 strokes before going to bed at night. Only a woman could understand her doing it. Gertie clerked downtown on State Street in a gents' glove department. A gents' glove department requires careful dressing on the part of its clerks, and the manager, in selecting them, is particular about choosing lookers with a special attention to figure, hair and fingernails. Gertie was a looker. Providence had taken care of that. But you cannot leave your hair and fingernails to Providence. They demand coaxing with a bristle brush and an orange wood stick. Now clerking, as Gertie would tell you, is fierce on the feet, and when your feet are tired, you are tired all over. Gertie's feet were tired every night. About 8:30 she longed to peel off her clothes, drop them in a heap on the floor, and tumble unbrushed, unwashed, unmanicured into bed. She never did it. Things had been particularly trying tonight. After washing out 3 handkerchiefs and pasting them with practised hand over the mirror, Gertie had taken off her shoes and discovered a hole the size of a silver quarter in the heel of her left stocking. Gertie had a country-bred horror of holy stockings. She darned the hole, yawning, her aching feet pressed against the smooth, cool leg of the iron bed. That done, she had had the colossal courage to wash her face, slap cold cream on it, and push back the cuticle around her nails. Seated huddled on the side of her thin little iron bed, Gertie was brushing her hair bravely, counting the strokes somewhere in her subconscious mind and thinking busily all the while of something else. Her brush rose, fell, swept downward, rose, fell, rhythmically. 96, 97, 98, 90... Oh, darn it! What's the use? Cried Gertie, and hurled the brush across the room with a crack. She sat looking after it with wide, staring eyes until the brush blurred in with the faded red roses on the carpet. When she found it doing that, she got up, wadded her hair viciously into a hard bun in the back instead of braiding it carefully as usual, crossed the room, it wasn't much of a trip, picked up the brush, and stood looking down at it, her underlip caught between her teeth. That is the humiliating part of losing your temper and throwing things. You have to come down to picking them up anyway. Her lips still held prisoner, Gertie toshed the brush on the bureau, fastened her nightgown at the throat with a safety pin, turned out the gas and crawled into bed. Perhaps the hard bun at the back of her head kept her awake. She lay there with her eyes wide open and sleepless, staring into the darkness. At midnight, the kid next door came in whistling, like one unused to boarding house rules. Gertie liked him for that. At the head of the stairs, he stopped whistling and came softly into his own third floor, back just next to Gertie's. Gertie liked him for that too. The two rooms had been one in the fashionable days of the Nottingham Curtain district, long before the advent of Miss Buck. That thrifty lady, on coming into possession, had caused a flimsy partition to be run up, slicing the room in twain and doubling its rental. Lying there, Gertie could hear the kid next door moving about, getting ready for bed, and humming "Every little movement has a meaning of its own," very lightly under his breath. He polished his shoes briskly, and Gertie smiled there in the darkness of her own room in sympathy. Poor kid, he has his beauty struggles too. Gertie had never seen the kid next door, although he had come 4 months ago. But she knew he wasn't a grouch, because he alternately whistled and sang off-key tenor while dressing in the morning. She had also discovered that his bed must run along the same wall against which her bed was pushed. Gertie told herself that there was something almost immodest about being able to hear him breathing as he slept. He had tumbled into bed with a little grunt of weariness. Gertie lay there another hour, staring into the darkness. Then she began to cry softly, lying on her face with her head between her arms. The cold cream and the salt tears mingled and formed a slippery paste. Gertie wept on because she couldn't help it. The longer she wept, the more difficult her sobs became, until finally they bordered on the hysterical. They filled her lungs until they ached, and reached her throat with a force that jerked her head back. Rap, 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 sounded sharply from the head of her bed. Gertie stopped sobbing, and her heart stopped beating. She lay tense and still, listening. Everyone knows that spooks rap 3 times at the head of one's bed. It's a regular high sign with them. Rap, rap, rap. Gertie's skin became goose flesh, and cold water effects chased up and down her spine. "What's your trouble in there?" demanded an unspooky voice so near that Gertie jumped. "Sick?" It was the kid next door. No, I'm not sick," faltered Gertie, her mouth close to the wall. Just then a belated sob that had stopped halfway when the raps began hustled on to join its sisters. It took Gertie by surprise and brought prompt response from the other side of the wall. "I'll bet I scared you green." "I didn't mean to, but on the square, if you're feeling sick, a little nip of brandy will set you up. Excuse me mentioning it, girlie, but I'd do the same for my sister. I hate like sin to hear a woman suffer like that, and anyway, I don't know if you're 14 or 40, so it's perfectly respectable. I'll get the bottle and leave it outside your door." "No, you don't," answered Gertie in a hollow voice, praying meanwhile that the woman in the room below might be sleeping. "I'm not sick, honestly I'm not. I'm just as much obliged, and I'm dead sorry I woke you up with my blubbering. I started out with a soft pedal on, but things got away from me. Can you hear me?" "Like a phonograph. Sure you couldn't use a sip of brandy where it do the most good?" "I'm sure." "Well then, cut out the weeps and get your beauty sleep, kid. He ain't worth sobbing over anyway, believe me." "He?" snorted Gertie indignantly. "You're cold. There never was anything in peg tops that could make me carry on like the heroine of the Elsie series. Lost your job? No such luck. Well then, what in Sam Hill could make a woman—" "Lonesome," snapped Gertie. "And the floor walker got fresh today, and I found 2 grey hairs tonight, and I'd give my next week's pay envelope to the double click that our front gate gives back home." "Back home?" echoed the kid next door in a dangerously loud voice. "Say, I want to talk to you. If you'll promise me you won't get sore and think I'm fresh, I'll ask you a favour. Slip on a kimono and we'll sneak down to the front stoop and talk it over. I'm as wide awake as a chorus girl and twice as hungry. I've got 2 apples and a box of crackers. You on?" Gertie snickered. "It isn't done in our best sets, but I'm on. I've got a can of sardines and an orange. I'll be ready in 6 minutes." She was too. She wiped off the cold cream and salt tears with a dry towel, did her hair in a schoolgirl braid and tied it with a big bow, and dressed herself in a black skirt and baby blue dressing sack. The kid next door was waiting outside in the hall. His grey sweater covered a multitude of sartorial deficiencies. Gertie stared at him, and he stared at Gertie in the sickly blue light of the boarding house hall, and it took her 1/2 of 1 second to discover that she liked his mouth, and his eyes, and the way his hair was mussed. "Why, you're only a kid," whispered the kid next door in surprise. Gertie smothered a laugh. "You're not the first man that's been deceived by a pigtail braid and a baby blue waist. I could locate those 2 grey hairs for you with my eyes shut and my feet in a sack. Come on, boy. These Robert W. Chambers situations make me nervous." Many earnest young writers with a flow of adjectives and a passion for detail have attempted to describe the quiet of a great city at night when a few million people within it are sleeping or ought to be. They work in the clang of a distant owl car and the roar of an occasional L train and the hollow echo of the footsteps of the late passer-by. They go elaborately into description and are strong on the brooding hush, but the thing has never been done satisfactorily. Gertie, sitting on the front stoop at 2 in the morning, with her orange in one hand and a sardine can in the other, put it this way: "If I was to hear a cricket chirp now, I'd screech. This isn't really quiet. It's like waiting for a cannon cracker to go off just before the fuse is burned down. The bang isn't there yet, but you hear it 100 times in your mind before it happens. My name's Augustus G. Eddy," announced the kid next door solemnly. "Back home, they always called me Gus. You peel that orange while I unroll the top of this sardine can. I'm guilty of having interrupted you in the middle of what the girls call a good cry, and I know you'll have to get it out of your system some way. Take a bite of apple, then wade right in and tell me what you're doing in this burg if you don't like it." "This thing ought to have slow music," began Gertie. "It's pathetic. I came to Chicago from Beloit, Wisconsin, because I thought that little town was a lonesome hole for a vivacious creature like me. Lonesome. Listen while I laugh a low, mirthless laugh. I didn't know anything about the 3-ply, double-barreled, extra-heavy brand of lonesomeness that a big town like this can deal out. Talk about your desert waste. They're sociable and snug compared to this. I know 3/4 of the people in Beloit, Wisconsin, by their first names. I lived here 6 months, and I'm not on informal terms with anybody except Teddy, the landlady's dog, and he's a trained rat and book agent terrier and not inclined to over-friendliness. When I clerked at the Enterprise store in Beloit, the woman used to come in and ask for something we didn't carry, just for an excuse to copy the way the lace yoke effects were planned in my shirtwaists. You ought to see the way those same shirtwaists stack up here. Why, boy, the lingerie waists that the other girls in my department wear make my best hand-tucked effort look like a simple English country blouse. They're so dripping with Irish crochet and real Val and Clooney insertions that it's a wonder the girls don't get stoop-shouldered carrying them around." "Hold on a minute," commanded Gus. "This thing is uncanny. Our cases dovetail like the deductions in a detective story. Kneel here at my feet, little daughter, and I'll tell you the story of my sad young life. I'm no child of the city streets either. Say, I came to this town because I thought there was a bigger field for me in gents' furnishings. Choke or what?" But Gertie didn't smile. She gazed up at Gus, and Gus gazed down at her, and his fingers fiddled absently with the big bow at the end of her braid. "And isn't there?" asked Gertie sympathetically. "Girlie, I ain't saved $12 since I came. I'm no tightwad, and I don't believe in packing everything away into a white marble mausoleum, but still a gink kind of whispers to himself that someday he'll be furnishing up a kitchen pantry of his own." "Oh," said Gertie. "And let me mention in passing," continued Gus, winding the ribbon bow around his finger, "that in the last hour or so that whisper has been swelling to a shout." "Oh," said Gertie again. "You said it, but I couldn't buy a second-hand gas stove for what I've saved in the last half-year here. Back home they used to think I was a regular little village John Drew, I was so dressy. But here I look like a yokel on circus day compared to the other fellows in the store. All they need is a field glass strung over their shoulder to make them look like a clothing ad in the back of a popular magazine. Say, girlie, you've got the prettiest hair I've seen since I blew in here. Look at that braid, thick as a rope. That's no relation to the piles of jute that the flossies here stack on their heads, and shines like satin." "Well, it ought to," said Gertrude wearily. "I brush it 100 strokes every night. Sometimes I'm so beat that I fall asleep with my brush in the air. The manager won't stand for any romping curls or hooks and eyes that don't connect. It keeps me so busy being beautiful, and what the society writers call well-groomed, that I don't have time to sew the buttons on my underclothes." "But don't you get some amusement in the evening?" marvelled Gus. "What was the matter with you and the other girls in the store? Can't you hit it off?" "Me? No. I guess I was too woodsy for them. I went out with them a couple of times. I guess they're nice girls all right, but they've got what you call a broader way of looking at things than I have. Living in a little town all your life makes you narrow. These girls, well, maybe I'll get educated up to their playing someday, but—" "Oh, you don't," hissed Gus. "Not if I can help it." "But you can't," replied Gertie sweetly. "My, ain't this a grand sight? Evenings like this I used to love to putter around the yard after supper, sprinkling the grass and weeding the radishes. I'm the greatest kid to fool around with a hose. And flowers, say, they just grow for me. You ought to have seen my pansies and nasturtiums last summer." The fingers of the kid next door wandered until they found Gertie's. They clasped them. "This thing just points one way, little one. It's just as plain as a path leading up to a cozy little 3-room flat up here on the north side somewhere. See it? With me and you married and playing at housekeeping in a parlour and bedroom and kitchen, and both of us going downtown to work in the morning just the same as we do now. Only not the same either. Wake up, little boy, said Gertie, prying her fingers away from those other detaining ones. I'd fit into a 3-room flat like a whale in a kitchen sink. I'm going back to Beloit, Wisconsin. I've learned my lesson all right. There's a fellow there waiting for me. I used to think he was too slow. But say, he's got the nicest little painting and paper hanging business you ever saw, and making money. He's secretary of the KPs back home. They give some swell little dances during the winter, especially for the married members. In 5 years we'll own our own home, with a vegetable garden in the back. I'm a little frog, and for me, it's the Puddle. Gus stood up slowly. Gertie felt a little pang of compunction when she saw what a boy he was. I don't know when I've enjoyed a talk like this. I've heard about these dawn teas, but I never thought I'd go to one, she said. Good night, girlie, interrupted Gus abruptly. It's the dreamless couch for mine. We've got a big sale on in tan and black seconds tomorrow.
What did you think of The Frog and the Puddle?
I liked it. The writing style amused me. I found it quite funny. Got my sense of humour.
It's funny. It's got that kind of voice to it, the 1912 voice, where everyone speaks kind of awkwardly, and it's hilarious now. I don't know if it was funny then, but yeah, also just the weird jokes and similes, the good time, and it's nice that it's like a quiet, understated kind of story. Makes a change, as you said. No, I thought, yeah, I like it.
It's very much got a more emotional, internal kind of plot to it than like an action-filled one.
Yeah. I liked it because of that, and also because I think it was funny. The dialogue was funny even in 1912 because this
Yeah,
author made a point of studying dialogue and then using it for comical effect. So it would sound real, but
I think it's funnier now. I think it has aged well.
I see. Yes, I would agree with that. And as a lot of the stories we look at don't really have this sort of snappy modern dialogue we're used to, it was nice that this one kind of did do that a little bit.
Yeah.
Nice to see that they did do it back in the day. It's just that, not as often.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thrilled by the dialogue.
Let's talk about then these first 3 paragraphs, which are a bit strange and feel a bit out of place because they're in first person and then the rest of the story is told in third person. And I just don't understand why. Like, I would chop those first 3
Yes.
paragraphs out.
But they're so good, aren't they, Mel? Don't you enjoy those first 3 paragraphs?
I don't really remember them, to be honest.
I love them. They felt so
Oh.
tongue-in-cheek about trying to get a short story published. Like, I just felt like this writer was just fed up with all these New York writers who are, like, successful just because they're in New York. Like, everyone hears about New York and never about Chicago, and it's like, it's almost dissecting the short story format. That was possibly popular at the time.
It was, but
Delightfully catty.
why was it there?
So let me give you my theory. I think it's there because it has a very sassy kind of voice that's really interesting and funny, and it gives us faith that the story we're about to read is going to deliver something good and make us want to keep reading it. It's kind of like a hook, right? He's like, so if I just start with this character who's not very happy, some people might not be too interested. If I give you some jokes and some sassiness up front, maybe I can lure people in. That's my theory.
Something appealing about the what about this place kind of thing that we might feel now. Not everything in England is in London. God.
Yeah, I think it does add something because the whole story really is about not being glamorous in many ways. So it adds to the theme.
And it is a way of, like, kind of setting the scene. It's like kind of like a framing device in the sense that, like, for example, with films, we'll often start with a narrator, and then the narrator sort of fades out as you get into the story. The only difference is that the
Yeah.
narrator doesn't come back at the end in this, which would probably make it feel more bookended and closed and relevant.
A lot of the time when you do third person, you start from a more external viewpoint. You kind of viewing the character from outside, then you slowly move into their head and you get to know them a bit more internally. And it's kind of a version of that.
I thought her perspective kind of came back a bit later on as well in that paragraph talking about how many young writers have tried to describe cities at night and haven't quite done it justice. But then they never
Yeah,
come
that's
back
true.
after that. and I was like, what's going on with this narrator? I don't understand.
I think it was just to add a bit more voice to it.
Hmm.
So you were both fans of the narrator.
I thought it
Yeah.
was very unusual. I don't think you'd see it nowadays, but I did actually quite like it. So maybe we should make it cool.
What, bring the trend back?
Yeah, just randomly change POVs after the first 3 paragraphs.
Christ.
I'm sure no one will mind.
I mean, to be fair, films do that a lot.
Yeah, I feel like if you did that, nobody would ever publish it. But clearly, this story exists and it works pretty well. So
For me, I just feel like it's out of place.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I
I do see where
I
you're
can
coming
see
from.
why I would be inclined to agree, except the fact that I think if you cut it out, it would be a worse story. So
If it makes it better, then it's okay. Okay, cool. So, did anybody else find Gertie really, really relatable?
Yeah.
Okay,
I loved her.
that's good.
Like, she definitely appeals to my both sense of vanity and, of course, the sense of feeling out of depth or lonely in, like, social situations and cities. Like, there's a particular loneliness to cities that her character really encapsulates.
I did think, why on earth is she brushing her hair before she goes to bed? This is stupid.
You're clearly not a woman.
Well, clearly, but it just seemed pointless to me.
It's
Especially
not.
since she seems
It's
to
really
hate it.
not. It's necessary. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to get out the house in the morning because your hair will be a bird's nest.
Really?
Yeah.
Take a shower or something.
I do take a shower and then I shaved off the back of my head because otherwise I would have to brush my hair ridiculously.
I mean, it makes sense to
Also,
do it in
back
the
in the
morning.
day, a lot of the time back in the day, a lot of the oils, instead of having frequent baths or showers, you'd have specific oils in the hairbrushes you used to effectively brushing your hair was cleaning it.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is also the larger context.
Yeah, I liked that line where she said that after 6 months in the city, she was only on, was it first name terms with the dog or something like that?
Yeah.
I'm about to move out of somewhere I've lived for years, and I don't know the name of my upstairs neighbour, although I do know what their children sound like running around on the ceiling. So I'm just like, yes, I understand.
I think, isn't it fair to say that you're the only person who knows what the children sound like running around on the ceiling?
Yeah,
So you know something about their kids that no one else in the world knows.
I do.
I mean, the previous neighbours and the next neighbours know.
Wow.
It's
Presumably.
probably a good job I wasn't here to warn them. But anyway, yeah, I thought that because she was so relatable, it really made me invested in the story because I guess I cared about what would happen to her in a strange way that's like a less engaging character I wouldn't have cared about.
We come in on quite an intimate moment of, like, someone kind of losing their temper, which I think also makes it easy to root for because she's just doing something very ordinary. And we've all had that thing where, like, we kind of want to go to bed because we've got loads to do, but then there's something you have to do before you go to bed. And it doesn't have to be brushing your hair, but, like, something, like,
Yeah, all her conflicts are like so easy, like everyday things that it makes it easy to like her, I think.
Agreed.
Cool. So this is something that I think we mentioned at the beginning of the episode, but I liked that this story was a lot quieter and less dramatic than a lot of the other ones that we've done. I was going to ask if you two both felt the same way, or if you were like, no, I need some more action happening here.
Well, look, the story has plenty of conflict in it, so that's all you need, really. Like, a lot of people think about stories, you need lots of action and all kinds of dramatic things happening. Really, you just need a character that wants something that they don't have.
Or need something that they don't have, I think
Yeah.
might be more accurate. But
Mm,
yeah, like, you can tell when people have, like, in action movies, for example, where the action's there, but there aren't any stakes. So even if there's technically action happening, it's still a really boring movie because you don't get the emotional investment. So it's not because the conflict isn't there or, like, the driving force. I'm picking the Hobbit movies. But anyway.
So you can have an action-filled story that is a bit blah because it doesn't have any emotional.
Yeah. Like, just watching, like, there's a certain visual impressiveness to, like, watching, a car chase. But if it's not actually relevant to the plot in any way, then it's still going to ultimately fall flat compared to, like, sometimes some stories which have less action but are still, like, wildly more tense, for example.
I think this is especially true in books.
Very hard to do action in books.
Having a story like this where it's just a scene between two characters talking about life can still be just as an effective story as like the doom that came to Sarnath, just in a different way.
Why did you pick that one?
I don't know. It just was the first one that came into my head. What would you have picked?
I guess it kind of fits. That story does, usually, like if you pick a Lovecraft story, you're like, where's the conflict in this? But you picked a decent one, and that story does actually have some conflict up front. So yeah, okay, never mind.
But yeah, it's like conflict is what makes a story. It's not how many action scenes you've got.
Who had the glass of water line? You know the one. It was Kurt Vonnegut. Yeah, Kurt Vonnegut said, you should make your characters want something right away, even if it's only a glass of water.
It's true. By the time like your inciting incident in a longer piece of work comes around, you should have like a clear sense of your character wanting something, which means that the reader will want it as well.
I think the other idea behind this is that you don't have to lead with your plot, but you need to have something that's driving your character, even if it's a small thing.
Yeah, even if it's just like getting to work on time.
Yeah.
In this story, then I guess he wants companionship, company. I don't know,
Yeah.
and that drives the story.
But at the start of the story, all she wants to do is go to sleep.
Yeah.
Right.
It gives you the little want first.
I'm just edited sleepy. Why is it that? These characters just wanting to go to bed.
Maybe we've subconsciously picked stories about going to bed because we're all tired.
Maybe.
Podcasting is tiring, don't you think?
Can be. It depends. Editing it is tiring.
For some reason, recording an episode makes me really hungry.
You eat dinner before?
I do eat before, and I have to eat again after. It just makes me really hungry. I don't know why.
Your brain's working so hard, it's using up so many calories.
You're right. It's burning through all the glucose.
I'm glad my questions are nice and challenging for you. Okay. Did you enjoy the humor in the story? And did you have a favorite line?
Well, what's your favorite line?
My
Mel?
favorite line is the one where she says, "I'd fit into a 3-room flat like a whale in a kitchen sink."
Yeah, that's a good line. It's also it makes me imagine that she's bigger than a 3-room flat, which doesn't make sense.
That's a very harsh reading of it. Elsewhere it says she's very beautiful. I think it says she's a looker or something. It might put it different to that. That's the very English way to put it.
I enjoyed the humour. I'm torn between two favourite. Well, one is a favourite line-ish, and one is a favourite moment. So my favourite line is probably of the hated beginning. A confession of this kind is not only good for the soul, but for the editor, it saves him the trouble of turning to page 2, just because that is so delightfully savage.
I love it.
But the other one I really, really liked was the moment where she throws her hairbrush, and then it's got that is the humiliating part of losing your temper and throwing things. You have to come down to picking them up anyway, and that's just been me so many times. Like, that you can trash a room, but then you have to slinkingly tidy it up, don't you?
I thought you were going to steal my one, which is also when she throws the hairbrush, but I like that she says, "Darn it, what's the use?" just some beautiful dialogue.
Why did you enjoy that so much? Just because it says "darn it"?
It sounds so quaint now and self-censored, but it's funny.
My other favorite line is when the kid is like, "Oh, he's not worth crying over," and she said, "There never was anything in Peg Tops that could make me carry on like the heroine of the Elsie series." Don't know what the Elsie series is, but I found that very funny.
What the hell is a peg top?
Also don't know, but it sounds funny, so I'm down. Should I Google what is a peg top?
Apparently it's a spinning top with a metal pin or peg forming the point.
Right, okay.
Interesting.
Guess that was common knowledge back in the day.
Probably.
Although I don't know what else is common knowledge. Like she says, let's get out of these Robert W. Chambers situations make me nervous or something.
Yep.
Which is a very odd line.
No, because I remember that he was quite famous for writing about girls like her in 1912.
Like her in what way?
Like girls who'd gone to work, like entry level.
Oh,
We talked about it in the episode. They were called Chambers girls who were entering the workplace for the first time.
You're right. I'd forgotten about that. Okay, that makes sense.
So
now.
I liked that line because it proved something that we found out in another episode. But I did really enjoy that line as well. I don't know, there are just so many lines in the story that I really enjoyed because they were funny. And I appreciate the story that can make me laugh. It's the best thing.
And it was contrasted really well with quite relatable, kind of sad loneliness of her situation.
Yeah.
Made it funnier.
It's because, in a way, when you feel that bad, the only way to feel better is to make fun of it.
Yeah. The bit when she was crying and then the neighbour knocked on the door and she's like, clearly I'm about to get murdered by ghosts or something.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I'd think.
She's great. I love her.
I don't know. Does anyone else think it's kind of sus that she's like, oh, I can hear everything that my neighbor's doing. I can hear him breathing. And then she immediately starts crying loudly.
Well,
To be fair, she did think he was asleep.
I don't know. It's pretty suspicious if you ask me.
What exactly do you think her aim was? She turns him down.
She's like, oh, I can. Well, maybe she thought he would be a fit, attractive man, and then he's not. And she's like, well, see you later, kid.
No, but she says he thinks he's attractive. She
Well,
says she
maybe
thinks
she was
he's
just
attractive.
being nice.
she likes the way his hair
What,
was
in her
mussed.
inner voice?
Yeah. I don't know. It just seemed odd to me.
I mean,
Maybe it's just me then. I'm just
it
crazy. I'm
emphasizes the
too cynical.
situation, doesn't it? Like, it's the idea of being that close to someone and then not close to them at all. Like, kind of emphasizes so close yet so far of, like, the physical proximity, but the complete lack of emotional intimacy. Like, it's like when you're at a party and you feel like you're in a room, like, completely on your own.
Yeah.
At the same time, it makes it worse.
It's really weird being lonely while you're surrounded by people. So this is a very character-driven story, which is the end of it is like Gertie's decision on what she's going to do. Did you have any tips for writing stories that are very character-focused?
Know what your characters are like. Sounds obvious, but it means a lot. If you can define your characters properly, you know what they sound like, you know the kinds of things that they think about, you know how they tie their shoes, whatever.
Do you do anything particular to help you figure that out?
Usually characters are the hardest thing to plan. You can't really plan a character very easily. I often find the best thing to do is just start writing and then say, does this feel right? And if it does, you keep going. And if not, you look back and say, no, I want them to be a bit more this way. And you think about, it's usually good to think about people you've met or you know and try and work that in however you can.
Me and Simone are now both wondering if we're in your book somewhere.
I don't think so. The scary part is that you could be in my books without me knowing about it because writing is weird that way.
Yeah, subconscious.
It's tempting when you start developing characters to come up with the end goal that you want your character to be, aka the final version of. But that means you've cut the growth, so you need to actually take a few steps back from where you want to end up at and what you want your character to be to give them room to get to where you want them to be. Like, if you start your story when they've already done the growth, you can't do the character arc as easily.
So you almost start with a character and then send them backwards.
Yeah. Like, if you know you want your character to be really brave, well, okay, pick one of their characteristics, remove it. How did they get it?
Yeah, this is the one thing about characters you can plan. If you're a planner like me, it's hard to plan character voices and how they feel on the page, but you can plan their arcs, and usually they're very logical and they make sense.
Very logical, like in the sense that
character at the end of the story is a certain way. That means at the start of the story they weren't this way. How does something happen that changes that? What do they do to change that?
I see.
Very set thing.
I never thought about starting at the end before. This is very interesting to me because I struggle with this.
I mean, you need to give them somewhere to get to. You could equally do it the other way, where you think about what's my character's weakness and then how do they overcome that.
Yeah. I just think it's tempting when you're trying to think up a really nice, positive character to forget to do that a bit. But yeah, like you said, it can go either way.
I also usually imagine the worst thing that could happen to them and then make that happen.
Always fun.
Wow.
I love doing that.
Sadism.
It is.
Great fun. I live for the angst. Can be useful when you start adding in other characters and their dynamics to kind of see how they play off each other. So, for example, are your characters very similar? Are they going to drive each other crazy? Do they conflict in what they want or need? Or
Yeah, that makes sense. So at the end of the story, Gertie decides to return to Wisconsin. Did you feel like it was a positive end to the story?
Okay, we need to talk about the ending. So the way I interpreted it was they had this cool conversation about all the things that they could do, and then he's like, "Well, better get back to work tomorrow," and it's kind of all the things that they've said are kind of forgotten, and they just kind of carry on. Was that your interpretation?
No.
Not in the slightest.
Okay. Am I crazy or did I just read it differently?
Probably you read it differently. So the way I read it was that he kind of said, "Oh, well, why? Maybe we should get married, and we can do this and we can do that." And Gertie was sort of sitting there thinking of home, and something kind of clicked for her, and she made that decision. No, I don't want to do this. That sounds awful. I'm going home.
Yeah, that's kind of what I got. Like, he's kind of being held up as like the example of all the life she could have there. And like, he's got his attractive qualities, but then there's also the conversation they've been having about how it's not a fit for her and how she feels out of place and all of the kind of struggles that she needs to do to kind of fit into that world, like the brushing her hair like 100 strokes a night, and how it's just exhausting. And then it's the idea of holding that up and then deciding against taking it. She refuses him. She goes home.
But he has the opposite reaction, right?
What do you mean?
Like they both are in this situation, like they're set up in this similar situation where they feel unhappy. But after they talk about it and they talk about what their dreams are, she seems resolved that she's gonna leave, and he seems resolved that he's gonna carry on as he is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he wants the city life. That's what he wants to do, but she doesn't. She wants to go.
Which I thought was quite
I
a nice
see.
contrast, because I think a lot of people, when approaching that story, it's like the idea of that going home would have been giving up. It's put in a story where most characters, as exemplified by Gus, would kind of regroup themselves and pull themselves up by their bootstraps and make a success of the city. But I think that often ignores the fact that knowing yourself and what you want and is important, and like particularly in the context of wanting perhaps the quiet life versus the glamorous city, is actually a valid choice that the character can make, and there's nothing wrong with her taking that choice. Like, I don't know, which is why I
Yeah,
think
I
it's
liked
quite
that.
a positive ending.
But don't you think it's strange that Gus spends most of the story complaining about how he doesn't have any money and he hates his life, and then says, I'm just going to stay here anyway?
Well, some people would do that. They would stick it out until they got promoted or found somewhere cheaper to live or so yeah, it is strange that people do stick it out, but some of them do. I think that's
Hmm.
very realistic.
I feel like the fact that he's sticking at it is the real crux of the story. And maybe this is just my interpretation, but I feel that that overshadows Gertie's character arc a little bit for me.
He's the more traditional protagonist in that he continues to carry on.
I don't think that's traditional. Well, okay, let me rephrase. I think that is normal, but I think that the point of the story is the author is trying to point out that that's what most people would do, but it doesn't make sense.
Is that what most people would do, though? Like, I feel like it's just what we get fed a lot in stories, but I don't think it's what a lot of people do in real life. Like, there are plenty of people who give up on their dreams.
But people are very resistant to change. They'll moan about their situation and say, hey, I don't like this. I don't have any money. My job sucks. And then they wake up the next morning and they carry on. Right? I think that's the point.
I guess, but then I guess it's different kind of breaking points. Like, he's not the one crying, he's not at the breaking point.
I think the author is trying to say what Gertie does is correct. And she recognizes maybe where she belongs or what she should do to change the situation. But most people don't do that.
But I could take that view.
Yeah, I thought it was about Gertie's choice being completely valid, even though some people would see it as a failure. She doesn't. She wants to go be a frog in the puddle, and that's fine. And I was confused about like whether it was a positive ending or not because I was like, should I be feeling sad that she gave up? Should I be feeling like pleased that she's figured out what she wants to do? I'm not sure.
I mean, I don't think it's as simple as completely positive or completely negative. Like, it's the idea of that to choose one path in your life, you have to sacrifice another one. And there are good and bad on both sides of the path that you could take.
Yeah.
I do feel the author is specifically endorsing Gertie's choice.
Yes, it's not portraying it as like, you're giving up, you're a failure.
It's portrayed as more of a moral victory.
I don't know if it's a moral victory. Moral implies some judgment against Gus for staying, and I don't think that's quite true.
I think it is.
Why?
I think there's definite hints of like the way that the narration and also Gertie kind of demeans Gus towards the end of the story when she realizes his intentions makes it seem like the author is trying to push her ideas that he is making the wrong decision, which is fine. I'm just saying that I feel like that's quite a big part of the story.
Well, dreamer versus cynicism, isn't it? Like, he's dreaming about it, and she's got the more realistic kind of view, I guess. Practical.
Cynical?
Yeah, cynical. Okay, I think it's cynicism versus idealism. It's not moral, personally, but you are, of course, entitled to your opinion.
I felt quite...
I don't think it's necessarily cynicism to say that I'm a frog and I should be in the puddle.
I mean, she says she's learned her lesson. There's a certain level of, cynicism. And, because it's the idea of, she used to think that this guy was slow, so it's obviously not that she's got this great guy waiting for me. He's love of my life. It's settling to a certain extent. Readjusting priorities. Practical. Versus Gus, who's the unpractical one, but the dreamer, which is often the people who end up staking it out in the big cities in stories.
Okie dokie. Would you like to hear some facts about Edna Ferber? Because I think she's very interesting. So she was Jewish. She lived in the US and she faced discrimination for a lot of her life. And this was around the time that very not good things were happening in Europe, i.e. Nazi Germany. Her 1938 autobiography, A Peculiar Treasure, included a spiteful dedication to Adolf Hitler, which stated, "To Adolf Hitler, who has made me a better Jew and a more understanding human being, as he has of millions of other Jews, this book is dedicated in loathing and contempt." So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
As much as it's a baller move, I respect it, badass.
Mm.
Also, I hate the subtext that she didn't have anyone better to dedicate it to.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a shame. It's her autobiography as well. But yeah, she was, treated really badly, and so were her family because of who they were. She wanted to be an actor, but it didn't work out. She dropped out of college and became a reporter for the Appleton Daily Crescent instead at 17. Teenage reporter. Pretty cool. She started writing short stories for newspapers and eventually worked up to novels, and she won Pulitzer Prize for So Big. A lot of them were adapted into films, plays, Broadway shows. I'd never heard of her before, so to hear that she was really famous in 1912, or probably a bit later than that, 'cause this story is from Buttered Side Down, which was one of her first collections, blew my mind, because I was like, why haven't I heard of her? Maybe if you're an American, you have heard of her, but I had never heard of her. She never married or had any romantic partners. She said she was married to her work, which, yeah, she wrote a lot of stuff. And she was also she could be quite sassy as well, which I think comes across in her writing. I liked this joke from the Wikipedia. A man told her suit made her resemble a man, and she said, "Oh, so does yours."
Nice.
Technically the truth.
Cutting, though.
Yeah, she was a character and thought she was very interesting. So there you go.
You might say she was fabulous.
Yeah, exactly.
Every time. I swear to God, you need to get a pun every time.
I mean, you could say that, but you'd Edna not.
You're disgusting.
Let me just edit that out. Not really.
How dare you.
Crimes against words. Yeah, that was, I guess, Edna in a nutshell. But I think it sounded interesting. I haven't heard of Showboat. Have you heard of that one, Simone? That seems to be one of her most well-known works that was made into a musical.
I think I've heard of the musical, but not in detail.
Yeah, it was based on her novel. A lot of early films were based on her work as well, and they starred people like Barbara Stanwyck, who was a pretty big deal, and Rock Hudson, Thought it was kind of cool.
Yeah.
She was one of the first authors who had her works adapted to movies, paving the way.
Pretty cool.
Yep. I like her. I read a few stories by her, and I think I really enjoyed all of them. They were just interesting, and they were funny, which, I don't know, something about her humour, I like it. So if you want to read more Edna Ferber, a lot of her stuff is on the Gutenberg Project, and it's good. Okay?
I enjoyed it.
Sweet. Thank you for listening. Please leave a comment on our website to let us know what you thought. You can also find all our previous short stories and episodes. We'll be back with another story next week. Goodbye.